Tonight, you're marching with a Roman legion, and I'll be honest with you right up front. You wouldn't last a week, not because of battles. Battles were actually the rare part. No, what would finish you off is everything else. The 4 a.m. trumpet, the 60 pounds on your back, the 20 miles before dinner, and then, at the end of it all, the cheerful order to dig a fortified city out of a hillside before you're allowed to sleep. The Roman army conquered the world, but mostly it outwalked it, outdug it, and outporridged it. So settle in and get comfortable, because the only marching you'll do tonight is in your imagination. Pull the blankets up and let your body go heavy. And before you drift off, if falling asleep to history sounds like your kind of night, tap subscribe so you always find your way back to camp. Then leave a comment with the oldest piece of family lore you know, maybe an ancestor who marched somewhere far from home in a uniform of his own. And if your family's stories don't reach back that far, just tell me where in the world you're listening from tonight. I read every single one. Now close your eyes. It's a little before dawn, nearly 2,000 years ago, and somewhere in the dark ahead of you, a trumpet is about to ruin your morning. Let's go find out why you wouldn't survive it. Every march begins long before the marching, so let's start where you would have started, the day you joined up, and the first reason you wouldn't survive this life, which is that it isn't a job. It's a sentence, a gloriously respectable pension-bearing sentence of 25 years. Picture yourself as a young man of the empire, somewhere in the 1st or 2nd century, a farmer's son maybe, or a townsman without prospects, standing in line at a recruiting station. The army does not take just anyone. There is an examination, the probatio, and the recruiting officers look you over like buyers at a horse fair. They want height. The ideal recruit stands tall by Roman measure, though in practice the standards bend when the legions are hungry for men. They check your eyes, your teeth, your build. They ask where you're from, because the army has opinions. Country boys, the manuals insist, make better soldiers than city boys, being already acquainted with sunburn, heavy lifting, and disappointment. They also check your paperwork, because this matters enormously. To join a legion proper, you must be a Roman citizen. If you're a free man of the provinces without citizenship, there's a door for you too, the auxiliary cohorts, marching beside the legions, and we'll walk with them later, because their bargain is one of the most interesting in the ancient world. For now, let's say you pass. You're in. Then comes the moment that changes everything, the oath. The sacramentum, sworn aloud, to follow your commanders, to serve the emperor, to not desert the standards. Romans take oaths with a seriousness that's hard for a modern mind to fully feel. This one binds you before gods and men, and everyone present understands that you have just stopped being entirely your own person. You receive your viaticum, a little bundle of traveling money, 3 gold pieces, the first coins the army will ever give you, and among the last it gives you freely, and your name goes into the rolls, into the lists, into the machine. 25 years. Say it slowly. A recruit of 18 will be a man past 40 when his discharge comes, if it comes. No weekends, no quitting. Your hometown, your girl, your mother's cooking, all of it now belongs to a category the Army calls not the Army's problem. And here's the honest part. Most recruits sign anyway, some eagerly, because the army means regular food, regular pay, a doctor, a pension, and a place in something enormous. In a hard world, that's a real bargain. You'd probably have signed, too. You just wouldn't have known yet what your legs were about to learn. Before the army lets you march anywhere that matters, it teaches you to march, and Roman military training is where your modern body would file its first formal complaint. The manuals are wonderfully blunt about the program. First, the step itself. Recruits drill for hours to walk in rhythm at the military pace until 1,000 men can move as one creature. Then, distance, the training standard written down for us by the military writer Vegetius, says a recruit must manage 20 Roman miles at the military step in 5 summer hours and 24 miles at the quicker step. That's a marathon adjacent morning in sandals as a beginner with an instructor whose sympathy died decades ago, and you'll do it again and again in every season because the army trains in rain and heat alike, on roads and off them, uphill deliberately. Then they hand you your first weapons, and here the Romans reveal their sense of humor. Your training sword is wooden, and it is made deliberately heavier than a real one. Your training shield is wicker, also double weight. The logic is beautiful and merciless. Struggle with the heavy fake, and the real thing will one day feel like a feather. You spend hours at the palos, a stout wooden post planted in the ground, thrusting at it, always thrusting, never the wild slash, because the drill masters teach with weary patience that the point beats the edge. Somewhere in month 2, hitting a post in the rain for the 400th time is where you'd quietly start composing your resignation speech. There is no one to give it to, and the marching drills come with luggage because the army trains loaded. Recruits practice with packs, building up the weight, learning to carry and keep pace at the same time. Two skills that fight each other every single step. You learn to swim if a river is available, because armies cross rivers. You learn to vault onto a horse, dig to a standard, build to a standard, pitch a tent in the dark. Roman training is less about ferocity than about repetition, doing ordinary things so many thousands of times that they become as automatic as breathing. Here's the detail I love most. Roman writers say their army's exercises were bloodless battles, and their battles bloody exercises, meaning training was so realistic that the real thing felt familiar. But notice what that training mostly is. It isn't sword fighting, it's walking. Walking far, walking fast, walking heavy, walking in step. The Empire's secret weapon, it turns out, is the same thing your fitness app keeps nagging you about, except the Legion's step counter is a man with a staff, and he is never, ever impressed. Now let's load you up, because the single most important fact about the Legion March, the one that would break you by the second morning, is this. Everything the army needs, the army carries, and a shocking amount of it is carried by you. It wasn't always this way. In earlier centuries, Roman armies dragged enormous baggage trains, carts, servants, mules beyond counting, and moved at the speed of their slowest wheel. Then came the general Gaius Marius, around a century before Caesar, who looked at his crawling supply column and made a decision soldiers would grumble about for the next 500 years. The men would carry their own kit. The soldiers, with the immortal sarcasm of soldiers everywhere, promptly nicknamed themselves Marius's mules. The name stuck because the truth stuck. From then on, a legionary is a man shaped cargo system. So here is what goes on your body: your armor, mail, or the famous segmented plates, riding on your shoulders all day, helmet, slung or worn, sword on one hip and dagger on the other, two javelins. Your shield, a great curved slab of layered wood, carried in its leather weather cover on your back or shoulder. And then, over one shoulder, the furka, a carrying pole shaped like a long T from which swings your entire household, a bronze cooking pot and mess tin, a hand mill, yes, a millstone, we'll get to why, rations for several days, a cloak that doubles as your blanket, spare boots worth of hobnails, entrenching gear, a pickaxe or spade because your evenings are spoken for, a wicker basket for hauling earth, and one or two sharpened wooden stakes lashed on top, which are pieces of tonight's fort. You are carrying pieces of a fort. Added up, and modern estimates land somewhere between 60 and 90 pounds, depending on the season, the orders, and how honest we're being. For comparison, that's roughly a large suitcase, the one the airline charges extra for, worn on your body, over armor for 20 miles, followed by construction work. There is no ergonomic strap system. There is a wooden pole and your increasingly philosophical shoulder. And here's the part that gets me. The soldiers made it work through 10,000 small clevernesses that never made the history books. How you balance the furka, how you pad a strap with a rag, what you quietly leave behind, and what you'd never leave behind. Each squad of 8 shares one actual mule for the tent and the heaviest gear, one mule, 8 men, and endless debate about what deserves mule privileges. You, a modern person, would spend day 1 rearranging your pack every mile, and day 2 discovering muscles that have no names. The legionary next to you, meanwhile, has carried his house on his shoulder for 11 years, and he is humming. Let's go all the way down to where the march actually happens, your feet. Because empires, whatever the poets say, are conquered at ground level, and Rome's ground level is a piece of military engineering called the caliga. The caliga is often called a sandal, and that undersells it badly. It's an open-work marching boot, a single piece of leather cut into straps, laced up over the foot and ankle, built on a layered sole. And driven through that sole, business end down, are dozens of iron hobnails. Those nails are the whole idea. They grip like cleats. They take the wear instead of the leather, and when a cohort comes down a paved road in step, the sound is unforgettable. Hundreds of hobnailed soles ringing on stone, a sound Roman towns knew the way. We know a train coming. Archaeologists still find those little iron nails scattered along Roman routes across 3 continents, the empire's breadcrumb trail, shed one nail at a time. The design is genuinely brilliant for the job. The open straps let air through and water out. A soaked boot drains instead of rotting your feet, which is the ancient marcher's nightmare. The fit can be adjusted strap by strap. Soldiers maintained them like the survival equipment they were, renailing worn soles at night by the fire, trading cobbler tricks, breaking in new leather with oil and patience. And the army, ever thorough, deducted the cost of your boots from your pay, which means you marched 20 miles a day in footwear. You are also paying off in installments. Now, the myth to bust, and it's a cozy one. Picture a legionary on Hadrian's Wall in a British January, bare toes in open sandals, gazing stoically into the sleet. Lovely image? Not quite true, because we have the soldier's own mail, preserved in waterlogged ground at a fort called Vindolanda in northern England, and among the very first things it mentions, in a care package list that will make you smile across 19 centuries, are socks. Woolen socks sent to a soldier along with sandals and underwear. The word is udones, and the message is eternal. Somebody's family, somewhere warm, worrying about a boy's cold feet at the edge of the world. Roman soldiers in cold provinces wore socks with their sandals, and I refused to hear a word against them because they had marched further than fashion. But here's why your feet, specifically, wouldn't survive the breaking in period. New recruits' feet had to become legion feet, hardened, calloused, indifferent, and there is only one road to that condition, and it is 20 miles long and repeats daily. Blisters, then blisters on blisters, then eventually feet like saddle leather that could walk over gravel while their owner discussed dinner. Yours are lovely, modern, moisturized feet that have never met a hobnail. Day 3 is where you'd sit down by the roadside and simply become a local. Your day on the march does not begin at dawn. It begins before dawn in the dark with a trumpet, and the Roman army has turned the act of waking up and leaving into a machine so smooth it still gets quoted in military schools. We know exactly how it worked because the historian Josephus watched Roman armies break camp and wrote it down, half in awe. It goes by trumpet calls, 3 of them. At the first signal, the whole camp rises and strikes the tents, thousands of men in the dark, folding their leather homes and packing their kits with barely a wasted motion, because they have done this exact sequence hundreds of times in this exact layout. At the second signal, the baggage goes onto the mules and the fortifications come down. The camp that was a fortress at midnight is, by gray first light, becoming a field again. Some mornings, the army even burns what it built, so no one else can use it. A whole night's labor deliberately given back. And then the third signal, but before it, my favorite ritual in the entire Roman world. A herald stands beside the commander and cries out, asking 3 times whether the men are ready for war. And 3 times, thousands of voices roar back that they are ready. Some, Josephus says, shouting before the question is even finished, throwing their right arms in the air. Then, and only then, the column steps off. 2,000 years before anyone said, "Hurry up and wait," the Roman army had choreographed the cure for it. Everyone knows the sequence. Everyone knows their place in it. And the whole city on legs pours itself onto the road like water, finding a channel. Now put yourself inside that morning, because this is another place you wouldn't survive. Not the drama, the routine. It's cold. It's dark. You slept perhaps 6 hours on the ground, in a tent with 7 other men and their opinions. Your breakfast is quick and unglamorous, hard biscuit, maybe warm porridge if the fires were fast, washed down with posca, the army's everlasting drink of sour vinegar wine and water, which tastes exactly like it sounds, and which soldiers swore by anyway. Your boots are cold. Your pack is exactly as heavy as yesterday. And the trumpet does not care about any of it. Here's the thing, though, the thing veterans knew, and you'd learn if you lasted. The machine is a comfort. When every motion of the morning is decided, there's nothing to dread and nothing to plan. Fold, pack, load, form up us, answer the herald, march. There's a strange peace in it, the peace of a task fully known. Half asleep men can do it, and do every morning from Scotland to Syria. The trumpet sounds, the army exhales, the road begins again. An army on the road is not a crowd. It is a formation, miles long, arranged with the care of a chess opening, and your place in it says everything about your day. Out in front, far ahead, ride the scouts and light cavalry, feeling the country like fingertips, checking the woods, the fords, the high ground, because an army is never more vulnerable than when it's strung out walking. Behind them comes the vanguard, solid infantry ready for surprises, and then a group you might not expect, the pioneers, the road menders, marching with tools instead of drawn weapons, because the column can only move as fast as its worst obstacle. So these men widen the track, firm up the soft places, bridge the streams, and generally manufacture the road the army is about to need. The Legion, you'll notice, keeps solving its problems with shovels. Then the main body, and it's a procession worth watching from a hilltop. The commander and his staff, the artillery and heavy gear on mules and carts, the baggage of each unit guarded jealously, and the legions themselves, ranks after rank after rank, each man in his place, each century behind its standard, thousands of hobnailed feet hitting the ground in a rolling rhythm you'd feel through your soles before you saw the column. The rear guard, strong and grumpy, walks at the back where the dust is worst and the stragglers gather. Everyone in the army has opinions about who deserves the rear guard. And oh, the dust. This is the sensory fact every ancient soldier knew, and no movie shows you. Thousands of feet, hooves, and wheels grind a dry road into a hanging brown cloud that can be seen for miles. Armies literally spotted each other by dust plumes. And if you're marching anywhere behind the front ranks, you are breathing the road all day. Your throat, your eyes, your teeth, road. In wet weather, the same road becomes churned soup, and the back of the column wades through what the front of the column merely dented. Position in the line of march is destiny, and it rotates, so everyone gets their turn eating dust. The Army's idea of fairness, and honestly, it is fair. The pace itself is set and kept like music. The standard is that steady military step, around 20 Roman miles in a summer day, more when the situation demands the quick step, measured out in paces, counted by habit, marked by milestones on the great roads. A Roman mile is 1,000 paces, mille passus. The very word mile in your mouth tonight is the sound of soldiers counting their steps 2,000 years ago. You march, you count without meaning to. The man ahead sways under his pole. The standards glint far up the column, and the miles pass the only way they ever pass. One, and then another, and then another. We've marched all night at the sharp end of the column. Now drop back, past the cohorts, past the standards, into the dust where the real logistics live, because behind every legion trudged its other half, the baggage train, the animals, and a whole unofficial town on foot, without which not one glorious mile happens. Begin with the mules, the unsung co-authors of Roman history, one per squad for the tent and heavy kit, plus the trains for artillery, tools, grain, the hospital, the pay chest. A full legion on the move trailed well over 1,000 animals, a second army with longer ears and stronger opinions. Soldiers knew their squad mule as a colleague, named, argued with, defended fiercely against other squads' slanders, fed sometimes better than regulations imagined. The mule carried the house, the men carried the fort. It was a partnership, and both sides knew the terms. When ancient writers want to convey a hard march, they count the dead mules before the dead men, the accountant's way of saying everything. Around the animals moved the army's shadow workforce, the colognes and muleteers, servants, grooms, drivers, plus the sutlers and traders licensed to follow, selling wine, extras, and small comforts at prices soldiers denounced with passion while paying anyway, payday after payday. Armies have never marched alone. They move like whales, wrapped in a cloud of smaller fish. Add the unofficial families we've already met, trailing their soldiers between postings, and the column stretching behind a legion was a genuine migrating town. Thousands of civilians, animals, and cargo, all moving at the pace of discipline, all fed and watered by planning that would humble a modern events company. And commanding all this, the trains, the road order, the camp marking parties, the supply, stood the officer with history's least glamorous crucial job, the praefectus castrorum, the camp prefect, typically a grizzled former chief centurion, third in command of the entire legion, and the man who actually knew where everything was. Battles get the marble reliefs. The camp prefect got the working army. Every general's brilliant maneuver rested on some iron haired veteran, ensuring the grain arrived, the mules were shod, the tools were counted, and the water was where the map promised. Ask any soldier which officer's competence he prayed for daily, and the honest answer was never the legate. Here, then, is the humbling final truth of the marching column. The sharp silver front of it, the part in every painting, was the smaller part. Behind it came the mules, the servants, the traders, the families, the spare boots and grindstones, the whole groaning apparatus of keeping 20,000 feet moving and fed. Empire, up close, it is freight. And your survival verdict in the baggage train? Worse, if anything. The trains ate the most dust, forded last through the churned rivers, and parked outermost when trouble rumored. All the miles, none of the glory, plus 1,000 mules' opinions. The legionaries, who missed nothing, had a whole genre of jokes about it. The muleteers, who missed less, had a better genre about the legionaries. And crucially, they had the wine concession. Look up the column, past the bobbing helmets and swaying packs, and you'll see the objects this whole marching city is emotionally organized around, the standards, and above them all, the eagle. Every century has its standard, the signum, a tall pole crowned with discs and emblems, carried by a signifer who you'll recognize instantly because he's the one wearing a bear or wolfskin over his helmet, the animal's face snarling above his own. Every cohort rallies to its standards. In the chaos of movement or battle, they are the fixed stars, the answer to the only question that matters when everything goes loud. Where do I stand? Signals travel by them, orders form around them, and they carry the unit's honors and history, a century's whole biography, hoisted on a pole. But the eagle, the aquila, is something else entirely. One per legion, silver or gold, carried by the aquilifer, guarded like a life. It isn't decoration, and it isn't merely a flag. It's the legion's soul, consecrated, kept in a shrine at the heart of every camp, alongside the men's own savings, which tells you exactly how much trust lived under that roof. Soldiers received their bonuses in its presence, oaths bent toward it. To lose an eagle to an enemy was the deepest disgrace Rome's military mind could conceive. Legions that lost theirs carried the shame for generations, and Rome would spend decades and treasure to get a single captured eagle back. When three legions were destroyed with their eagles in a German forest under Augustus, the recovery of those birds became something like a national quest, which explains the men around it. The Aquilifer marches knowing that in any disaster, he is the last thing that may retreat. There are famous stories, one from Caesar's own landing in Britain, where the invasion hesitated in the surf until an eagle bearer jumped into the waves alone, eagle held high, essentially daring his entire legion to let the bird be taken. They followed. Of course they followed. That was the whole design. And here's why this matters for your survival, figurative marcher. The standards are also the army's answer to despair. 20 miles into a bad day, soaked or scorched, your world shrunk to the pack straps in your feet. You look up, and there it is, your own standard, exactly where it should be, with your century gathered under it, like a family under a roofline. The march has a shape. You have a place in the shape. Ancient soldiers wrote about the standards the way sailors write about lighthouses. You'd roll your modern eyes at a metal bird on a stick right up until the fourth exhausted afternoon, when you'd catch yourself searching for it above the dust and finding it and feeling absurdly better. That's not superstition, that's engineering applied to the heart. Before we go further up the column, tune your ears, because the legion you're marching with is, among everything else, a musical instrument, and its whole day is played on brass. Three horns run this army. The tuba, a long straight trumpet, nothing like its modern namesake, carries the sharp commands: advance, halt, retreat, the edges of action. The cornu, a great G-shaped horn curling around its player's body like a bronze serpent, speaks to the standards. Its calls tell the signa when to move, and the men follow the standards, so the cornu, in effect, steers thousands of bodies with a phrase, and the buccina sounds the hours of camp life, the watches of the night, the reveille, the announcements, the alarm clock, church bell, and town crier of the marching city, all in one. A soldier could stand in total darkness, hear three notes, and know exactly what the next 10 minutes of his life contained. That was the point. Rome ran on many things, but minute to minute it ran on horn calls. The players, the tubicines, cornetines, buccinatores, were soldiers of standing, immunes with a skill the machine could not march without, and you can spot the cornetson on the great monuments. Horn wrapped around him, stationed beside the standards at the heart of everything, because in the roar of a bad day, the horn and the eagle together were the army's voice and its landmark, sound and sight, saying the same thing: here, this way, us. Signals had to cut through chaos and distance both, and the deep bellow of massed cornua carried over terrain that swallowed a man's shout whole. Trained ears pick their own calls out of a storm of noise, the way you can hear your name across a loud room. And the column itself made its own music, whether anyone willed it or not. Thousands of hobnails striking in step, a sound with a pulse to it, felt in the ground before it was heard. The creak and jingle of harness and mail in rhythm, and over it, when the road was long and the mood was right, the oldest military music of all, marching songs. Roman soldiers sang rude, rhythmic, gloriously disrespectful songs, including at triumphs, songs cheerfully mocking their own beloved generals to their faces, a licensed insolence old as armies. The words are mostly lost, the habit is eternal. Every marching cadence called out in every army since is the same creature. Rhythm turned into fuel, misery turned into chorus, 20 miles made shorter by making them scan. Could your ears survive? Oh, eventually. That's the trap. The first week, the bacchina at the fourth watch would feel like a personal attack, brass fashioned into cruelty. But the calls would colonize you, the way all schedules do. Veterans discharged after 25 years reported the old soldier's universal haunting, waking sharp at the reveille hour for the rest of their lives, in farmhouses miles from any horn, hearing it anyway. The legion gets into the body through the ears and never fully leaves. Somewhere under your comfortable modern sleep schedule, be honest, there's an alarm tone that owns you the same way. Yours just has a snooze button. Theirs had a cornison, and he was already dressed. Here is the myth bust at the center of this whole story, the one that reorganizes everything you think you know about Roman soldiers. The legions spent vastly more time building than fighting. The sword was the emergency tool. The everyday tool, the empire making tool, was the spade. And nowhere is that clearer than the surface under your aching feet, the Roman road, quite possibly laid by the same army now marching on it. When a legion wasn't campaigning, it was working, and the roads were the masterwork. Surveyors went first, sighting long, straight lines across country with an instrument called a groma, laying out routes so confidently direct that modern highways still follow them. Then came the digging, a deep bed cut down to firm ground, then layer on layer, large stones, smaller stones, gravel, a cambered surface arched to shed rain into ditches on either side. Fords were bridged, marshes causewayed, hillsides terraced. The result was an all-weather surface an army could trust in January, which is the entire strategic point. Rome could move men and news in seasons when everyone else's paths were mud, and the scale of it beggars belief. Somewhere around 50,000 miles of paved highway at the empire's height, plus far more of secondary road, enough to circle the earth twice, laced across 3 continents, marked mile by mile with inscribed stones. All of it handwork, soldier after soldier, with pick, basket, and rammer, moving the earth one load at a time. When you hear Roman legionary, you should picture a man sweating over a gravel layer far more often than a man in battle, because that's how he actually spent his years. The Legion was a construction company with excellent security. The genius of it compounds. Roads meant supply, so armies starved less. Roads meant speed, so fewer wars happened at all. Trouble could be answered before it grew, and everyone knew it. Roads meant trade and mail and towns springing up at the crossroads. The army built the skeleton, and the empire grew flesh on it. Some of those roads carried traffic for 2,000 years. Some carry it tonight. Somewhere in Europe right now, a delivery van is driving a line a military surveyor sighted while your Roman self was complaining about lunch. But let's bring it back to your feet, because the road giveth and the road taketh away. A paved surface is faster and cleaner and harder. 20 miles on stone in hobnails, under 90 pounds, hammers the body in a way soft ground never does. Even the veterans felt paved miles differently, and unpaved marches brought their own tax of mud and stumble. There is no version of the surface that forgives you. The road is honest, is what it is. It gives you exactly the empire you can walk, and every mile of it whispers the same quiet boast underfoot. We made this too, before breakfast, probably. Now we come to the fact about the Roman army that once you truly absorb it, you never think about anything the same way again. At the end of every marching day, after the 20 miles, under the pack, in the armor, the legion does not flop down and rest. It builds a fortified city every single night. This is the marching camp, the castra, and it is not a metaphor. While the column is still on the road, officers and surveyors ride ahead, choose the ground, water nearby, sight lines, drainage, and stake it out with flags. A great rectangle with rounded corners, the famous playing card shape, its streets and gates and headquarters all measured to standard before a single soldier arrives. Then the legion marches in, drops packs, and turns into a workforce. A ditch is dug around the whole perimeter, spades and picks flying, earth hauled up in those wicker baskets you've been carrying all day, and the spoil is piled inward into a rampart. And along the top of that rampart go the sharpened stakes, the ones lashed to every man's pack since morning. You have been carrying the walls, now you plant them. Inside, the tent lines rise in the exact same arrangement as last night, and the night before, and every night of your service. The same streets in the same places, the commander's quarters here, the standards and the shrine there, your own squad's tent in its own fixed address. A soldier could walk his camp blind drunk at midnight in a country he'd never seen and find his bed, because the city is the same city, rebuilt daily, a hometown that travels. Historians estimate a legion could throw the whole thing up in a few hours. Then, and only then, dinner. Why? Because the camp is how Rome sleeps. Inside that ditch and palisade, an army cannot be truly surprised. Night attacks on a Roman camp broke against those ramparts for centuries. Enemies marveled at it, and the marveling was the point. A force that entrenches every night, without exception, no matter how tired, is announcing something about itself. Discipline isn't what Romans did in battle. Discipline is what they did at 5 p.m. on an ordinary Tuesday with blistered hands when no enemy was anywhere in sight. And this, right here, is the summit of Mount You Wouldn't Survive. Never mind the march. You might limp through the march on pride alone. But then a centurion hands you a pickaxe. The most tired you have ever been in your modern life, the day you moved apartments, the day you ran your farthest, ends with a couch. The legionary's hardest day ends with an hour of digging, a wall to raise, stakes to plant, and a tent to pitch, and the men around you do it grumbling, but do it because they have done it 1,000 times and will do it 1,000 more. Somewhere between the ditch and the rampart, your figurative enlistment ends. Theirs just keeps going, city after city after one-night city, all the way across the map. Let's talk about what all this labor runs on, because the fuel of the world's most famous army will surprise you. The legion marched, overwhelmingly, on grain, wheat mostly. The Roman soldier is history's most dangerous porridge enthusiast. Here's the daily arithmetic. Each man's basic ration is measured out in grain, roughly a couple of pounds a day. And here's the catch that explains the strangest item in your pack. It comes as grain, not bread, unmilled, which is why every 8-man squad carries a hand mill, and why the sound of a Roman camp at evening isn't just fires and talk, but the stony grind of 1,000 small querns turning everywhere as tired men take turns milling tomorrow into flour. Then it becomes what it becomes: pulls, the eternal porridge, boiled up in the squad pot with whatever improves it: salt, a little fat, lentils, cheese, herbs pulled from the roadside. Or it's baked on a flat stone into rough camp bread, or carried as buccellatum, the twice baked hardtack biscuit that keeps forever and tastes like it. Alongside the grain, sour wine. Posca, cheap wine or vinegar cut with water, is the army's drink, issued and beloved and mocked in equal measure. It's safe, it keeps, it cuts thirst, and generations of soldiers swore no fine vintage ever tasted as good as Posca at mile 18. Add bacon or salt pork when supply allows, cheese, lentils, beans, whatever the country sells or the foragers find. Archaeologists digging Roman forts find a far more varied menu than the old vegetarian legions, myth claimed, with meat bones in real quantities. But the spine of every day, the thing your strength is actually made of, is grain, ground by your own arm, cooked by your own squad, eaten by firelight out of a shared pot with the 7 men who know exactly how many turns of the mill you did tonight versus how many you claimed. And logistics, quiet, unglamorous, war-winning logistics, hums underneath every bite. Commanders obsessed over grain supply the way modern generals obsess over fuel. The phrase, an army marches on its stomach, wasn't coined by Rome, but Rome lived it harder than anyone. Supply trains, granaries, harvest timing, river barges, campaigns were planned around bread. When you read that a Roman general delayed a war for a season, you're usually reading about wheat. Would your palate survive? Be honest. Porridge at dawn, biscuit at noon eaten walking, porridge again at dark, the same squad pot, the same smoke taste, day upon week, with vinegar water to wash it down. No menu, no options. The next interesting meal is possibly in another country. And yet, here's the thing the veterans knew: hunger is the finest cook who ever lived, and a marching day 20 miles long seasons a plain pot better than any spice. Men wrote home about dinners like this with actual fondness. The porridge is hot, the fire is warm, the mill has stopped grinding. For about an hour, in the smoke and the talk, the hardest life in the world is genuinely simply good. If the Legion is a machine, here is its smallest working part, and the true heart of this whole story: the contubernium. 8 men, 1 tent, 1 mule, 1 cooking pot, and 1 shared life. Whatever you imagine when you hear Roman army, the reality on the ground was this: a very small household walking across the world together. The word itself means something like tent companionship, and the tent is worth picturing: leather, low and snug, packed with 8 bedrolls nearly shoulder to shoulder. Your contubernium messes together, 1 pot, remember, and 1 mill, draws rations together, camps together in the same assigned spot, stands duty together, and is punished together, which is a detail with teeth. The army deliberately makes your squad mates responsible for you and you for them. Slack on the march, sleep through your turn at the mill, and you haven't disappointed an institution. You've shorted 7 specific men who share your roof and know where you sleep. It is the most effective performance management system ever devised, and it costs nothing. Within a season, These 7 strangers know you better than your family does. They know your snore, your blister history, your opinions on Pascha, the name you say when you're dreaming. They've carried your javelins on your bad day, and you've carried the water skins on theirs. The Latin word for a tent mate, contubernalis, drifted into ordinary Roman speech as a word for a close companion, which tells you everything. The Romans themselves reached for the army tent when they wanted to describe true friendship. Soldiers' tombstones, thousands of them, are set up not by wives or brothers, but by his fellow soldier, a squad mate, paying for the stone, composing the words, standing at the grave of a man he met in a recruiting line 20 years before. Evenings belong to this little family. The pot on the fire, the mill grinding, boots drying, someone renailing a sole, someone telling a story everyone has heard 11 times and demands anyway. Grievances get aired here, or carefully don't. New men get tested here, absorbed here, given their nickname here, and the nickname will outlive their real name. The squad has its own economy of favors, its own jokes compressed to single words, its own memory. Armies don't actually run on eagles and emperors, whatever the monuments claim. They run on 8 men who would be embarrassed to fail each other. And so, the survival question, and for once it isn't about your legs. Could you live at that distance from other people? No door, no room of your own, no headphones, every meal shared, every night in a leather tent full of other men's breathing, for 25 years? Modern life has trained you for privacy the way the Legion trains for marching. The first month, the closeness would crush you. But listen to the old soldiers across the centuries, because they all say the same disorienting thing. It's the closeness they miss. Long after the discharge, farms and pensions in hand, what they ache for is the pot, the smoke, the 7 voices. You'd arrive dreading the tent. If you stayed, and this is the strangest survival twist of all, you'd end up homesick for it forever. Let's talk money, because yes, this is a paying job, one of the ancient world's most reliable, and the story of a legionary's wages is a comedy in 3 acts. What you're paid, what you're charged, and what's left. Act 1, the salary. Under Augustus, a legionary earns 225 denarii a year, later raised, after a century of inflation and grumbling, to 300 under the Emperor Domitian. It arrives not weekly, but in a few installments a year, on formal paydays with the unit drawn up, which the army makes into small ceremonies, because the army makes everything into small ceremonies. It's honest money, a laborer's steady wage with a pension attached, better than most free men's prospects, on paper. Act 2, the deductions, and here, 19 centuries early, is every payday's universal heartbreak. We have actual surviving pay records, real soldiers' accounts on papyrus, and they read like a modern pay stub written by a comedian. Out of your wages, the army deducts your food, your boots, you knew about the boots, your clothing, hay for the unit's animals, equipment costs, a contribution to the burial club, so your comrades can bury you properly, arguably the most touching line item in accounting history. By the time the clerks finish, a soldier might see only a modest remainder in hand, and soldiers' complaints about it echo down the centuries with a freshness that needs no translation. There was even, famously, grumbling that you were essentially buying your own tent pegs while conquering the world. Act 3, what's left, and what the army does with it, which is genuinely clever. Your remaining pay can be banked, and the bank is the Legion itself, savings held on deposit at the heart of the camp, kept under the guard of the standards, in the same shrine as the eagle. Think about that arrangement. The unit's soul and the men's life savings, under one sacred roof, watched around the clock. No safer vault existed in the ancient world, and no clearer statement of what the standards meant. Add the occasional donative, bonus payouts when a new emperor wants the army's affection, which new emperors reliably do, plus the great discharge bounty waiting at the far end of 25 years, and a careful man could walk out of the army with real capital. Careful being the operative word, because camp life also invented the other path for wages: dice. We'll get to the dice. So, would your finances survive? You, who have never once been paid in 3 installments a year, minus your own groceries, boots, and funeral. Honestly, the discipline of it might be the healthiest thing that ever happened to your budget. No shops on the march, food deducted at source, savings locked behind an eagle and armed guards. The Legion, among its other achievements, may have been history's most effective forced savings scheme. 25 years of porridge and hobnails, and at the end, if you minded the dice, a farm. The ancient world's version of compound interest, measured like everything else here in miles. Every marching column has a nervous system, and in a legion, its name is the centurion, the man who will define your daily existence more than any emperor, and the next reason your figurative enlistment is in trouble. Picture him. He's not a general on a horse. He walks like you, but everything else is different. Transverse crest across his helmet so his men can find him in a crowd. Decorations on his chest from campaigns you've only heard about. 20 years of roads in his face, and in his hand the object that rules your life, the Vitius, a swagger stick cut from vine wood, part badge of office, part instructional aid, applied to the shoulders of the slow, the sloppy, and the mouthy with a liberty that would give a modern HR department a collective heart attack. There were roughly 60 of these men to a legion, each commanding his 80, promoted mostly from the ranks for competence, toughness, and literacy, and they were the actual load-bearing wall of the Roman army. Emperors came and went. Centurions were forever. The vine staff had range. At its best, it was a teacher's pointer and a father's authority, a tap on the shield arm, a whack across a lazy pack strap, a presence that kept 80 tired men honest. At its worst, history remembers a centurion in the German legions whose men nicknamed him Cedo Alterum. Bring me another, because of his habit of breaking his staff across soldiers' backs and cheerfully calling for a replacement. The nickname survives because his men made sure it survived. Soldiers have always taken their revenge in comedy first. The army knew it held both kinds of centurion, and the difference between serving under one or the other was the difference between a hard life and a miserable one. Around the centurion stood the little constellation of men you'd actually deal with hourly. The optio, his chosen deputy, who marched at the rear of the century, physically pushing stragglers back into rank. His badge of office was literally a long staff for prodding. The signifer with the standard, and the ledgers, since the standard bearer doubled as the century's bookkeeper. The tesserarius, keeper of the nightly watchword. A tidy chain of command, every link of which had once carried a pack exactly like yours, which is precisely why none of your excuses worked on any of them. They had personally used every excuse you could invent decades ago and remembered the going rate. Here's the honest assessment, though, the one the sources keep circling back to. The men respected far more centurions than they hated, because on the worst days, the flooded ford, the endless hill, the night dig in the rain, the centurion was there, in it, first in and last out, fed after his men, and everyone could see it. Harsh was survivable, unfair was not, and the institution, at its best, knew the difference. You, modern recruit, would spend week one outraged at the VDs. By month six, you'd have discovered the ancient soldier's actual relationship with a good centurion, complaining about him constantly, obeying him instantly, and privately hoping, when things got strange out there, that he never ever got transferred. The Roman army kept order in a hard world with hard tools, and honesty requires us to walk past this wall of the camp too, calmly, briefly, without gore, because the interesting part isn't the severity, it's the system. Start at the everyday end, because most discipline lived there. Miss your mark, and the army had a whole ladder of small miseries before anything darker. Extra fatigues, more digging, more mucking, more of everything you already hated, loss of privileges, pay docked, demotion from a comfortable specialist post back to the shovel, public rebuke in front of the century, which soldiers dreaded more than the Vedas. And then my favorite, for what it says about Roman psychology, units that disgraced themselves could be put on barley rations instead of wheat. Barley was animal feed and slave food. The porridge tasted nearly the same, and that was irrelevant. The punishment was eating humiliation 3 times a day, while the next cohort overate wheat and watched you. No lash ever cut like the neighbor's breakfast. If you're still awake here at the halfway milestone, Millipassus 500 give or take, you're doing better than most recruits, and there's no hurry at all. The column has miles of quiet story left. If your eyes are still open and you can manage it without waking yourself, quietly drop a in the comments so I know how far you marched tonight. And if you're already drifting, perfect. That's the whole idea. Fall back in. The road goes on soft from here. Nearly everything ran on that engine. Shame before the group. Punishments were public, so were rewards, decorations, torques, and discs worn on the chest, crowns for valor, praise in front of the standards, because the same instinct powers both. A legionary lived his entire life inside an audience of men whose opinion was his real currency, and the army tuned that audience like an instrument. Modern organizations pay consultants fortunes to build accountability culture. Rome built it out of porridge grades and an 80-man jury you had dinner with every night. At the far end of the ladder stood the punishments we'll only name from a respectful distance. The ancient world was not gentle, and for the gravest military crimes, betrayals that put every other man's life at risk, Rome reserved penalties that soldiers spoke of quietly and historians recorded with a shiver. The most infamous, decimation, the punishment of a unit by lot, was so extreme that even Roman commanders almost never used it. By the imperial centuries, it was essentially a ghost story the army told itself, less a practice than a shadow on the wall, defining the outer edge of the possible. We can note it, honor the weight of it, and keep walking. The daily reality of discipline was the barley, the extra ditch, the centurion's sigh, not the shadow. And would you survive the system? Here's the figurative truth. You'd never get near the dark end of the ladder, but the everyday end would grind you fine. Because the deepest punishment in the Legion isn't any single penalty, it's total visibility. No door closes, no mistake is private. Every lapse lands in front of 7 tentmates, one optio, and a centurion with a memory like a tax collector. You live your whole working life on stage. The veterans made peace with it and even drew strength from it. The audience that judges you is also the audience that carries you. But you, creature of closed doors and second chances, the barley wouldn't break you. Being seen would. Night falls on the marching camp, the fires burn down, and the Legion reveals one more machine, quieter than all the others, the apparatus of the watch. Because a Roman camp never actually sleeps, it takes turns. It begins each evening with a small ceremony of trust. From headquarters, a watchword is chosen, a single word, changed daily, and inscribed on a wooden tablet, the tessera. The tesserarius of each century collects it and carries it along the tent lines, and the word passes from post to post through the camp with signatures and formality, like something precious being handed down a chain of exact custody, which is precisely what it is. By full dark, every sentry in a city of thousands knows tonight's word, and no one else on earth does. Approach a Roman picket at midnight without it, and matters become very formal, very fast. The night itself is cut into 4 watches, measured, where the equipment allows, by water clock, because stars cloud over, but water is punctual. And here is the detail I find almost unbearably wonderful. The Romans ran inspections on the inspectors. The historian Polybius describes it in loving detail. Riders of the watch, chosen by lot, making rounds through the sleeping camp to check every sentry post, collecting from each sentry a token as proof the man was found awake and at his station. Come morning, the tokens are counted before the tribunes. A missing token means a post is summoned, testimony is heard, and someone's night is reconstructed like a court case. The army did not merely post guards, it audited them. Why such machinery? Because a sleeping army is the most vulnerable thing in the world, and everyone inside those ramparts knows their lives ride on a handful of tired men staying awake in the dark. Falling asleep on watch was therefore the sin the army forgave least. The punishments at that far end of the ladder we spoke of lived closest to this crime, and every recruit heard about it in his first week, in a low voice, from a veteran who let the silence afterward do the teaching. The result was a culture where sentries pinched themselves, paced, recited counted stars, anything, everything, while the camp breathed behind them in the dark. But let's end the night shift on its secret gift, the one sentries across all centuries know. Third watch. The camp asleep, the embers orange, the mist coming up off the ditch you dug yourself this afternoon. Beyond the rampart, the enormous ancient dark, wolves somewhere, wind in a country whose name you didn't know a year ago. And you, wrapped in your cloak, holding a spear and a word. Everything you love in the world is behind you, snoring. The stillness is total and strange, and the veterans admit this shyly across 2,000 years. Beautiful. You wouldn't survive the watch schedule, let's be clear. The third watch wake-up would end you by Thursday. But that hour itself, alone with the empire dreaming at your back, that you might remember forever. Between the dinner pot and the first watch, there's an hour, sometimes two, that belongs to no schedule and no centurion, and in that hour the marching camp turns into what it secretly is, a small town on a Friday evening. Let's spend it well. Begin with the soundtrack, dice. Gaming is the Legion's universal vice, played on boards scratched into shields, benches, and, archaeologists confirm with delight, onto the stones of fortress floors and the steps of headquarters buildings across the entire empire, which means soldiers were gambling essentially inside the principal's office. Knucklebones, dice cups, board games of strategy and luck, stakes of coins, rations, duties, and dignity. The army officially frowned, the way armies officially frown, and the frowning changed nothing for 500 years. Somewhere tonight, in every camp from Britain to the Euphrates, a man is winning back Tuesday's losses, and 7 spectators are providing commentary of a quality no arena ever matched. Then the rumor mill, the camp's true news service. Where is the column going? What did the scouts see? Is the legate being promoted, transferred, disgraced? Nobody knows. Everybody knows. The versions multiply by firelight. The Latin speaking army even had its own soldier slang, its camp speech, worn smooth like everything soldiers handle, and rumor was its finest art form. A story could cross a legionary camp faster than the Tesserarius could walk it, growing a new, improbable detail at every fire, and the veterans curated the very best ones for repetition. The omen someone's cousin saw, the treasure supposedly buried under the last fort, the centurion's legendary retort, improved annually. 2,000 years before group chats, the group chat was fully operational. Around the edges of the hour, the quieter lives. Men mending, always mending, boots renailed, straps stitched, tunics patched, mail rings replaced, the endless maintenance of a life carried on one's back, men writing letters home, or paying the squad's literate man to write for them, or simply dictating and trusting, men carving their names into things, because soldiers have carved their names into things since the invention of names and things. A flute somewhere, badly. Someone's laughter arriving over the tent rose out of the dark, anonymous and contagious. The mule complaining on principle. Small trades conducted at the boundary fires between strangers who will forget each other by the next province. And here's what would actually defeat you in this hour, my comfortable modern friend. Not the noise, but the nothing. No feed to scroll, no screen, no show, no solitary retreat. The entire entertainment industry of your evening is 7 faces, 1 fire, and whatever anyone can remember, invent, or wager. Your first week, that hour would feel like withdrawal. It aches just to imagine. But sit with them a while longer, a month say, and you'd learn what every century before ours knew in its bones, that a fire and familiar voices are not the absence of entertainment. They're the original entertainment, the one everything since has been imitating. The dice clatter. The rumor improves. The flute mercifully stops. And the hour that belongs to you does what it has always done, ends too soon at the first call of the watch. Let me hand you for a moment the most precious things the Roman army ever left behind. Not the eagles, not the roads. Letters, actual letters, in actual handwriting, dug out of the waterlogged ground at Vindolanda, a fort near Hadrian's Wall. And if you want to know what would truly break your heart about Legion life, it's not the marching. It's these. The Vindolanda tablets are thin slivers of wood, written on in ink around the year 100, preserved by oxygen starved mud, and recovered by astonished archaeologists in their hundreds. They are not proclamations or poetry. They are the paperwork and mail of ordinary soldiers and their households, and reading them feels like opening a door on a lit room. Here's the letter we've already met. Someone sending a soldier socks, two pairs of sandals, and underwear. The ancient world's most complete care package, dispatched to a cold posting with what you can feel under the inventory is somebody's worry. Here's a duty roster. Here's a note grading the local Britons with a soldier's affectionate rudeness. Here's an officer of cavalry writing up the chain with a request his men clearly drafted by committee. The unit, he reports with perfect professional gravity, has run out of beer and could more please be sent. And then there is tablet 291, which people travel across the world to look at, and rightly. It's a birthday invitation. Claudia Severa, the wife of a commander at a nearby fort, writes to her friend Sulpicia Lepidina at Vindolanda. On the third day before the Ides of September, for the celebration of my birthday, I warmly invite you to come to us. You'll make the day more enjoyable by your presence. The body of the letter is in a secretary's practiced hand, but the closing line, Sister, my dearest soul, farewell, is written differently, personally, and scholars believe it's Severa's own handwriting, the earliest known Latin written by a woman's hand, and it is a birthday RRSVP between best friends at the edge of the known world. Do you see what this does to our whole story? Every mile we've marched tonight, every ditch and ration and watchword was lived by people exactly this specific. The man beside you in the column has a sister who worries about his feet. The optio is owed a letter. The camp at the end of the road contains somewhere two women planning a birthday party in the wind off the moors with wine and friendship and a guest list, while the sentries walk the wall outside. History from above is emperors and arrows on maps. History from the mud is socks and beer and my dearest soul, and the mud in the end tells it truer. So here is the real survival question of this section, and it has nothing to do with your legs. The mail is slow, the distances are enormous, and everyone you love is a month of roads away. Could you live on letters? These people did, beautifully, bravely, on wooden postcards now under museum glass, still warm after 1900 years. Your phone is on your nightstand right now. Theirs was a folded sliver of birch, carried by a stranger worth walking to the gate for. And somehow, I suspect, no message you receive tomorrow will be loved as hard as those were. We've marched so far through an implied pleasant afternoon. Time to be honest about the ceiling of this whole enterprise, the weather, because the Legion marches in all of it, and the Empire's map guarantees that all of it means everything the planet can do. Consider the range of this army's commute. The same institution, same boots, same pack, same porridge, operates in the sleet above Hadrian's Wall, the baking gravel of the African frontier, the steaming river valleys of the Danube, and the thin blue cold of alpine passes. A soldier could serve his 25 years across 3 climates and arrive at each one carrying gear designed as a compromise among all of them. Summer marches meant the dust we've eaten, plus heat under armor that turned every man into his own personal bathhouse. The army marched early, rested at midday when it could, and drank by discipline, because water discipline was a survival skill with rank. Winter generally meant quarters. The marching season had edges, but campaigns overran the edges constantly, and then came frozen straps, numb hands at the tent lines, and the special comedy of hobnails on ice, which veterans learned to walk on and recruits learned to fall on. Rain, though, rain was the true enemy of the marching legion, and every soldier's memoir of misery features it. Rain meant the road turning to paste and the baggage bogging. It meant your woolen cloak drinking its own weight and doubling your load. It meant a wet tent, wet boots, wet grain, and the grim arithmetic of a night dig in mud that slides back into the ditch as you throw it out. Rivers rose at fords. Streams became opinions, then arguments. Whole campaigns stalled on weather, the way ships stall on wind, and the gods of sky and river received, we may assume, some very sincere attention from the ranks. And yet the machine marched, and the how is the lesson. Wool, first, the ancient world's miracle fiber, warm even when wet, worn in layers, hooded cloaks over tunics over more wool. The socks, as established, scarves, in hard country, wrapped leggings, and those leather marching trousers the cavalry favored. Fires built by men who could raise flame from wet wood as a professional qualification. And above all, the deep institutional stubbornness that treated weather as one more enemy that lost to preparation. Roads cambered to shed storms, camps ditched for drainage before the first drop fell, grain stored dry, boots re-oiled on schedule. Rome couldn't command the sky, so it out-organized it. Your forecast, by contrast, doomed. You, whose relationship with weather is a lock screen icon and a dash to the car, you'd survive the first rainy March the way you survive a bad camping trip, on novelty and complaint. It's the fourth consecutive wet day that would find you, cloak sodden, biscuit soft, tent breathing like a wet dog, and 8 more miles of paste before the digging starts. The legionary beside you isn't happier about it than you are. He's just made a different arrangement with the sky, an old soldier's treaty, renewed every season, whose single clause reads, "You do your worst, and we'll be there anyway." Every marching season, mercifully, has an edge, and when campaigning weather closed, the Roman army did the thing your exhausted figurative body has been begging for since the first trumpet. It stopped. Welcome to winter quarters, the Hiberna, and prepare to be genuinely, deeply envious of a Roman soldier for the first time all night, because the permanent fortresses of the empire were not muddy camps with pretensions. They were towns, stone-walled, tile-roofed, planned to the standard grid the army dreamed in, barracks blocks by the dozen, granaries raised on pillars against damp and mice, workshops, the hospital we've toured, headquarters with its shrine and strong room, the commander's courtyard house, and, hold your envy until you hear it in full, bathhouses. Proper Roman baths attached to forts across the whole empire, from the African sun to the wind off Hadrian's wall. The cold plunge, the warm room, the hot room with underfloor heating, the whole civilized sequence, built by the army for the army, because Rome had decided that even at the world's soggy edges, a soldier's aches deserved engineering. Men who spent summer sleeping in leather spent winter ambling to the baths through covered air, complaining with the profound contentment of the securely housed that the hot room was too crowded. Winter had its own rhythm, slower but never idle. This army was constitutionally incapable of idle. Training continued under roofs and in the yard, weapons drill at the post, route marches to keep the legs honest, the eternal maintenance of kit. The workshops rang all season. Smiths, leather workers, armorers, the fort repairing itself like a body healing. The clerks caught up the year's paperwork. The immunes flourished. Recruits arrived green and were seasoned indoors before the road could get them. And the festivals we've met came thickest in the dark months. Sacrifice days and holidays, roast meat and wine, the Saturnalia in December, when the whole Roman world briefly turned upside down, gifts and gaming and license, and even the army loosened its belt a notch and let the barracks be merry. Around every wintering fortress, the vicus glowed at full strength, the taverns busy, the families reunited on regular hours, the traders wintering profitably alongside their market. This is when the frontier felt least like an edge and most like a neighborhood. Smoke rising from the bath furnaces, a cohort's laundry stiffening in the cold, children who knew the sentries by name playing at the gates, and beyond the walls the season doing its worst to a countryside the army had every intention of ignoring until spring. The letters from Vindolanda breathe exactly this air: beer runs and birthday parties, socks arriving, life administered indoors. Winter was when the army got to simply live in what it had built. And so, one final assessment, because here, at last, your enlistment finds its natural habitat. Winter quarters is the part you'd survive. Honestly, you'd thrive. Regular bed, hot baths, indoor work for illiterate clerks such as yourself, festivals on the calendar, the road locked out beyond the walls. You'd winter beautifully. Your problem is only, and the veterans by the bathhouse would tell you this gently, steam rising, entirely without malice, that spring has never once failed to arrive. Somewhere under the frost, the road is waiting, patient as ever, and it already knows your name is on the muster. Here's a plot twist your aching figurative body will appreciate. Of all the places to fall ill in the ancient world, one of the very best was, believe it or not, a Roman army camp. The legion that works you half to death also runs the finest healthcare system of its age, and it's not close. Start with the personnel. The army maintained professional medici, doctors, many trained in the Greek tradition that led the ancient world, attached to the legions as a matter of establishment, not luck. Below them served the capsari, the bandage men, named for the capsa, the round dressing case they carried, combat medics avant la lettre, trained to stop bleeding and stabilize a man where he fell. Carvings on military monuments show them at work mid-battle, kneeling under shields, wrapping a comrade's leg with the calm of practice. And behind the lines, the permanent fortresses held something genuinely astonishing for the era. The valetudinarium, a purpose-built military hospital, courtyard plan, small wards, good drainage, cooking and treatment rooms, laid out with the same standardization as everything else Roman, so that a sick soldier in Britain and one on the Danube recovered in essentially the same building. The toolkit was serious too. Surviving Roman surgical instruments, probes, forceps, scalpels, bone levers, catheters, sit in museum cases today, looking unnervingly modern. A 19th century surgeon would have recognized most of the tray at a glance. Army doctors extracted arrowheads with specialized spoons, set fractures, stitched wounds, and understood, empirically long before germ theory, that clean water, clean dressings, and clean camps kept men alive. Wine and vinegar washed wounds. Certain herbs were standard issue for the medical stores, and Roman military manuals fuss about camp sanitation, latrine placement, and water sources with the energy of men who had noticed, over centuries of institutional memory, that dirty camps lose more soldiers than battles do. They were right, and their fussing saved more lives than any tactic. Daily practice was mostly unglamorous, which is exactly the point. The morning sick parade, blisters lanced, sprains wrapped, fevers assessed by a professional eye, teeth pulled, eyes treated, eye complaints were the great chronic misery of dusty marching life, and Roman army eye doctors even stamped their ointment sticks with maker's marks we still dig up. Malingering was assessed too, with 20 years of expertise. The medicus had seen every performance of mysterious back pain on ditch day ever staged, and reviews were mixed. But a genuinely sick man was excused, treated, fed up, and returned because the army had done the cold arithmetic and reached a warm conclusion. A trained legionary was expensive, and healing him was cheaper than replacing him. Compassion and accounting, marching in step, very Rome. So on this one front, mark the date, you'd survive better than you feared. Your blisters would meet a professional. Your fever would find a ward with a roof, a diet, and a doctor making rounds. By the standards of any century before the modern era, that's luxury. The catch, of course, is what happens next. The same system that heals you keeps meticulous records, and the morning the medicus signs you fit, your name returns to the roster returns to the road, and the road, fully recovered and rested itself, is delighted to see you. By now, you've grasped the central economy of legion life. Everything runs on labor, and the labor runs on you. Which brings us to the most sought after word in the entire Roman army, a word soldiers schemed toward for years: immunis, exempt. And the story of who escaped the shovel and how is the story of the army's secret second self. Here's the deal: the standard soldier, the munifex, the man liable for fatigues, owes the army every kind of work: the ditch, the rampart, the road gang, latrines, firewood, escort duty, the eternal list. But the legion is also, as we've seen, a rolling city, and a city needs specialists. So Roman military law recognized a whole class of soldiers excused from general fatigues because they possessed a skill the machine needed more than it needed one more man on a spade. We even have the list, preserved by a Roman legal writer, and reading it is like a census of a small town: surveyors and medical orderlies, craftsmen, smiths, arrow makers, glass workers, shipwrights, butchers and hunters, the men who tend the sacrificial animals, clerks, many, many clerks, because the army floats on paperwork, trumpeters and hornblowers, armorers, wagon makers, water engineers, grooms. Same pay, mind you. The immunis initially earns what the digger earns. He just earns it indoors, seated with clean hands, while the rain falls on other people. Can you imagine the politics? Every literate recruit made sure the signifer knew he could keep accounts. Every farmer's son with a knack for doctoring animals mentioned it, casually, twice a week. Veterans coached promising youngsters on which skills the unit currently lacked. A man might spend his evening hour learning letters from a tent mate precisely because letters were a ladder out of the ditch. And the system had teeth in both directions. Misbehave, and a centurion could revoke your exemption and reintroduce you to the basket and pick, a demotion that stung worse than a fine because all 80 of your closest colleagues got to watch you carry it. Above the immunes rose the true career ladder. The principals, the junior leaders on pay and a half and double pay. The tesserarius with his watchwords, the optio saving for his centurion's crest. The standard bearers running the century's banking. Add the specialists and staff together, and a remarkable share of the legion turns out to hold some post, some skill, some corner of the machine that is theirs, which quietly explains how one institution could build aqueducts, survey provinces, run hospitals, and keep books across 3 continents. The Roman army wasn't a mass of spear carriers with a few officers. It was the ancient world's largest technical school, and every fort was a campus. And you, here at last, genuine hope for your enlistment, because you, modern friend, are secretly overqualified. You can read, you can write, you can do sums without counting stones. In a world where literacy is a professional skill, you'd be clerking within the month, warm and dry, stylus in hand, tallying grain receipts while the rain hammers the men outside. Your survival strategy was never going to be your legs. It was always going to be your resume. The shovel comes for everyone in the Legion, but it comes slowest, the old soldiers knew, for the man who can spell shovel. March far enough with the Legion, and you notice something threaded through everything: the oaths, the standards, the calendar, the quiet gestures men make at fords and crossroads. This army lives with its gods, the way it lives with its boots. Constantly, practically, and with strong opinions about maintenance. At the center of camp, remember, stands the shrine, the eagle and standards housed like resident deities, the savings bank beneath them, sentries always posted. That's not a metaphorical arrangement. The standards received offerings, anniversaries, garlands on festival days. The Legion keeps a religious calendar as fixed as its marching order. We've actually found one, a papyrus duty calendar of festivals from a fort on the Euphrates, dense with observances: the birthday of the eagle, the anniversaries of emperors, the old festivals of Rome, each with its sacrifice, its parade, its day off the shovel, which may explain some of the piety. Sacred days meant ceremony, meant roast meat from the sacrifices, meant wine. The gods, a soldier might observe devoutly, provide. Beneath the official calendar runs the soldier's own layer of belief, and it's wonderfully human. Omens are read everywhere, because men whose lives ride on luck become connoisseurs of it. The flight of birds, the stumble at a threshold, the words overheard at departure. Altars sprout wherever the army pauses. We find them by the thousand, dedicated by centurions and cavalrymen and clerks, to Jupiter best and greatest, to the spirit of the place, covering all bases, the Roman specialty, to the river about to be crossed, to fortune, to the mother goddesses of wherever we are now. A soldier posted from Syria to Scotland packed his gods with his socks and adopted the local ones on arrival, politely, the way you'd learn the neighborhood. And through the later camps spreads Mithras, the soldier's mystery god, worshipped in small cave-like shrines by invitation only brotherhoods, a faith with ranks, initiations, and shared meals, which is to say, a faith shaped exactly like the army that loved it. Was it sincere? Deeply, and also practical, and the Romans saw no contradiction, which might be the most Roman thing about them. Religion was contract, correct observance for divine goodwill, do ut des, I give so that you give. The vows were specific, an altar promised if the campaign goes well, and then crucially paid. Half our surviving altars are receipts, inscribed willingly and deservedly fulfilled his vow. The gods of the legion were colleagues in the enterprise, senior partners with expectations, and you kept faith with them the way you kept your boots oiled, because the consequences of neglect were nobody's fault but yours. And you, at the ford, when the signifer pours a little wine into the water and the column murmurs, what would you do? Roll your eyes the first month, stand awkwardly the second, and somewhere in the third, after the hail on the pass, after the fever ward, after enough of the road's plain lessons in how much is not up to you, you'd find your hand making the small gesture with everyone else's and mean it more than you expected. The march teaches humility by the mile. The gods of the legion, whatever else they were where the army put that humility so it wouldn't slosh around loose. You'd survive the theology fine. It's the humility that would take practice. Now for the rule of legion life that startles modern listeners most, the one with the longest shadow. For roughly the first 2 centuries of the empire, a serving soldier could not legally marry, not needed permission, could not. The law simply declined to recognize a soldier's marriage until his discharge, and around that cold statute, tens of thousands of warm human lives arranged themselves anyway. The official logic was brutally practical. The army wanted men movable, postable across the world at a season's notice, and wanted its fortunes unentangled from widows' claims and inheritance suits. A soldier belonged to the standards. The standards did not share. So the recruit swearing his sacramentum at 18 was also, in effect, swearing off legal family until past 40. On paper, the Legion was an institution of single men. On paper. Reality, as always, filed its dissent. Outside every permanent fort grew the vicus, the civilian settlement of traders, taverns, workshops, and in the vicus lived the soldiers' unofficial families, partners in everything but law, children who knew their father's watch schedule, households running on legion pay. The army knew, everyone knew. The tombstones tell it plainly, soldiers commemorated by women who call themselves wives with defiant tenderness, law or no law. Discharge documents that carefully legitimize existing children, which is bureaucracy's way of admitting what it always understood. When a unit transferred provinces, the vicus often simply packed up and followed, whole shadow families migrating in the army's wake, unrecorded on any strength report, as essential as the mules. The human cost hid in the legal gaps, and it was real. A soldier's partner had no widow's standing if the road or the fever took him. Children born in service started life outside citizenship's front door and had to be let in by paperwork later. The discharge diploma, that bronze certificate we'll meet again, mattered so intensely partly because of this. For auxiliary soldiers, it granted citizenship and, crucially, recognized the marriage and the children in one engraved stroke. Imagine holding that plate, 25 years of unofficial love made suddenly retroactively real by two sheets of bronze wired together. Families kept them for generations. You would have too. The ban finally fell around the year 197 when the Emperor Septimius Severus, a soldier's emperor consolidating an army he needed loyal, granted serving soldiers the right to legal marriage, and the paper world at last caught up to the vicus. Historians still argue over his motives. The couples outside the gates, one suspects, argued less. And here's your figurative survival verdict on this front. You, who can text your person from anywhere on earth, asked to build a household in the legal shadows on a soldier's schedule with the next posting always a rumor away. The marching would hurt your body. This one would hurt the other thing. And yet the vicus stood, generation after generation, lamplit outside every fort from Wales to Arabia, proof in wattle and daub that the heart is also an engineer, and it, too, builds every single night. All night we've marched with the legion, the citizens, the heavy infantry, the famous silhouette. Time to widen the shot, because roughly half of Rome's army was somebody else entirely. The auxilia, the non-citizen regiments recruited from every people the empire touched, and their bargain with Rome is one of the great stories hiding inside this one. Here's the deal in one sentence. Serve 25 years in the auxiliary cohorts, and at discharge, Rome makes you and your children Roman citizens. That's the trade, engraved in bronze, and think about what it means. A Batavian from the Rhine Delta, a Thracian hillman, a Syrian villager, men born outside the citizenship that defined the ancient world's premier status, could march their families into it on their own feet. The auxiliary's diploma, those two bronze plates recording his service and his new citizenship, is among the most consequential documents a person could own in that entire world. We've found hundreds. Each one is a completed 25-year bet, paid in full. And the auxilia weren't second rate. They were specialized, which is different and often better. Rome's genius was recruiting each people for what it already did superbly. Cavalry from the horse cultures, Gauls, Thracians, later Sarmatians, organized into alae, wings, the army's finest riders. Archers from Syria and Crete, whole cohorts of them who could darken a hillside. Slingers from the Balearic Islands, whose stones outranged arrows. And the Batavians, cherished by every commander who ever borrowed them, famous for swimming rivers in full armor, horses and all, arriving on the wrong bank of the impossible obstacle with weapons dry and expressions unfriendly. On many frontiers, the auxiliaries were the frontier, manning the wall forts, patrolling the roads, doing the empire's daily police work while the legions massed in the great fortresses behind. The march mixed them all. A column in Britain might string together Gallic cavalry, a Syrian archer cohort, Tungrians from the Low Countries, and a legion from Spain, a walking congress of the whole Mediterranean and beyond, swapping words, dice games, gods, and recipes down the length of the road. The Vindolanda letters, remember, come mostly from auxiliary units, Batavians and Tungrians. The beer request was theirs, and history feels no surprise. Over generations, the distinction itself dissolved. Sons of enfranchised auxiliaries joined legions. Emperors extended citizenship outward, until in the year 212, nearly every free person in the empire held it, and the old bargain completed itself. The army hadn't just defended the empire. Man by man, diploma by diploma, it had manufactured Romans. So your enlistment options, honestly assessed, as a provincial without papers, the auxilia would have been your door, and your figurative survival odds, there are exactly as bad, plus rivers. But notice what you'd be marching for, because it reframes every blistered mile of this night. Not conquest, from where you'd stand, inclusion. 25 years of porridge and watchwords, and at the end, a bronze certificate that says your children start where you couldn't. There are worse things to carry over a mountain. Most of the men in that column would tell you, in accented camp Latin, passing the Posca, that there was almost nothing better. And now the biggest myth bust of the whole march, the one that turns the entire story inside out. So let's say it plainly. Most Roman soldiers, most of the time, never saw a major battle. Whole enlistments, 25 years, boot to diploma, could pass without a single pitched field. The most famous fighting force in history spent the overwhelming bulk of its existence not fighting. And that wasn't failure. That was the design working perfectly. Do the arithmetic of an ordinary military lifetime. Big battles were rare events, years apart even on lively frontiers, generations apart on quiet ones, while the army stood watch across decades and continents. A soldier posted to a settled province spent his quarter century on patrol, escort, construction, garrison, drill, the eternal peacetime of walls. Even on campaign, as we've seen, the days were made of marching, digging, and logistics, with battle the brief, occasional lightning in a long weather of work. The sources wink at it themselves. Soldiers and writers alike knew the spade outweighed the sword in any honest inventory of a legionary's hands. Here's the strategic secret underneath. The march was the weapon. Rome's deepest power wasn't winning battles. Plenty of ancient armies won battles. It was the demonstrated, road-proven ability to arrive. Anywhere, in any season, reliably. Every camp entrenched in enemy view, every road driven through wilderness, every column that appeared over a hostile horizon exactly when resistance was being discussed. These were arguments, and they usually persuaded before a blow fell. Historians call it deterrence. The tribes on the frontier just called it Rome. A power that can always show up rarely has to do anything when it gets there. The legions won their wars mostly by making them not worth starting. 20 miles a day, every day, visibly, for 500 years. Which means the true daily face of the Roman army wasn't a battle line at all. It was a survey crew on a hillside, a patrol counting wagons at a river crossing, a cohort building a granary, a clerk stamping receipts, a medicus lancing blisters, a wall of sleeping men behind a ditch, dug by their own hands in a country that would still be arguing about them 2,000 years later. The empire wasn't held by violence so much as by presence, relentless, organized, hobnailed presence, and presence, it turns out, is a marching problem, which is why they drilled the walking and not primarily the glory. And so the title of tonight's story keeps its promise on a technicality you can now appreciate. You wouldn't survive a Roman legion march, but not because of enemies. You'd likely never meet one. What would finish you is the thing that finished no legionary, because it was the thing they were truly built for. The schedule, the trumpet, the pack, the miles, the ditch, tomorrow's trumpet, repeating without drama or mercy or an ending, across a career longer than your working memory. The battle you imagined dreading, turns out to be a rumor. The porridge is real, and it is undefeated. Let's give your figurative Roman self the ending most real ones actually reached. Because despite everything this knight has thrown at him, the ordinary legionary's story very often finished, not on a battlefield, but at a ceremony, gray-templed and squinting, holding the one document he'd been marching toward since a recruiting officer checked his teeth a quarter century ago. It was called the Honesta Missio, the honorable discharge, and the army, true to itself, made it a ritual. Time-served men mustered before the standards they'd followed across who knows how many provinces, names read from the rolls kept by a generation of clerks, the release pronounced. For the auxiliary, the bronze diploma, citizenship, marriage, children, all made real at last in engraved Latin. For the legionary veteran, the premia, the great discharge bounty, a lump of capital worth many years' wages. Under Augustus, 3,000 denarii, or its equivalent in land. An empire-wide pension scheme, funded by dedicated taxes into a special military treasury, paying out on schedule for centuries. The ancient world had seen armies beyond counting. It had never seen a retirement plan. Where did they go? The discharged. Everywhere, and often not far. Many settled in veteran colonies. Whole towns founded for them, laid out by military surveyors on the tidy grid of the only home they'd known, so that a veteran's new hometown was comfortingly a camp that had stopped moving. Many more simply put roots down beside their old fortress in the vicus where their families already lived, marrying legally now the wife of 20 unofficial years, watching sons enlist under the same standards. Veterans became the empire's connective tissue, town councilors, landowners, businessmen with parade ground posture, Latin speakers, and Rome explainers in every province. Their discharge bonuses, seeding farms, and workshops from Portugal to the Euphrates. The army didn't just export power. Man by man, pension by pension, it exported settled, road-building, ledger-keeping Roman life. And the men themselves? Their tombstones, thousands survive, read like the closing credits of tonight's whole story. Career summaries, rendered in proud abbreviation, served 26 years, decorated twice, veteran of the 20th. The unit named always, like a family name, because it was one. Monuments raised by wives, finally called wives, by sons in the same profession, and again, most moving of all, by fellow soldiers, the last surviving tent mates, paying for the stone of the man they'd shared a mule with through 3 emperors. Some stones even carry a small carved scene, the veteran reclining at dinner, cup in hand, at ease forever, the eternal off-duty hour, granted at last in stone. So there it is, the destination, under all those miles, not glory, a farm, a porch in a grid-planned town, a pension, a family made legal by bronze, and stories that got 20% better every year he told them. You wouldn't have survived the march to get there. We've established this thoroughly and with affection. But it's worth knowing as you drift what the march was for in the lived arithmetic of the men inside it. 25 years of trumpet and porridge, traded, deliberately, eyes open, one counted mile at a time, for an old age with a roof, a vine, and absolutely nothing left to dig. One last look around before we make camp for the night, because the strangest thing about the Roman legion march is that in a very real sense, it never ended. You live inside its footprints right now. Let me show you. Start with the map of Europe and read it like a muster roll. That Chester, Castor, Cester, ending on English towns, Chester, Lancaster, Manchester, Gloucester, is the Latin castra camp, each one a town that condensed like dew around a legion's walls. York was the fortress of Eboracum. Two Roman emperors died there. One was proclaimed there. Cologne is Colonia, a veterans' colony. Its very name just colony, the way a company town keeps the company's name. Vienna grew from the fort of Vindobona, Belgrade from Singidunum, Budapest wraps around Aquincum. Across 3 continents, dozens of the cities where people are falling asleep tonight began as a rectangle of leather tents behind a one-night ditch that decided to stay. The roads did the same trick. Highways across Britain, France, Italy, and beyond still run for miles along alignments a military surveyor cited with a groma. Medieval pilgrims, postal coaches, and modern motorways all inherited the same stubborn straight lines, because the legions had already found the best way through, and the best way doesn't expire. Even where the pavement is long gone, the route survives as a hedgerow, a parish boundary, a footpath walked by dogs and their humans over the buried gravel of the seventh layer. 50,000 miles of decisions still being obeyed, and the quieter inheritances closer than you think. Mile in your mouth from mil passus, 1,000 soldiers' paces. Retirement bonuses, standardized medical care, signing incentives, veterans' benefits, institutions the Legion ran at scale before almost anyone. The very idea, so familiar you can't see it, that an organization should do things the same way everywhere. Write it down, train to it, and audit it. Every franchise manual and hospital checklist on Earth is a distant grandchild of the camp that rebuilt itself identically every night from Scotland to Syria. Rome's most durable export wasn't marble, it was procedure. But here's the inheritance I'd leave you holding as the fires burn down, and it's the smallest one. Archaeologists walking Roman roads still find them. Hobnails, single iron nails, shed from marching boots 18 centuries ago, lying in the soil of a lane in Yorkshire or a hillside in Jordan, each one a footstep that happened. Some particular man, on some particular afternoon, tired to exactly the degree you've spent tonight imagining, put his foot down on his way to a camp he'd build before dinner, and left this. The eagles are in museums, the emperors are marble, but the march itself survives as 10,000 small-eared periods at the ends of sentences we'll never read. And the road goes quiet, and the column passes on, and history, if you listen very closely at the edge of sleep, sounds exactly like footsteps. Come stand with me now on the rampart of tonight's camp, yours, the one this whole story has been building, ditch and stake and tent line, in the country of almost sleep. The march is over. Every mile of it is behind you, and the camp is doing what the camp does best, holding the whole world off while the tired sleep. Look down the tent rows in the last firelight. The mill has stopped grinding. The dice are pocketed, the debts forgiven till payday. The boots stand drying in their pairs at each tent door, renailed for a morning that, tonight, just tonight, is none of your concern. Somewhere down the line, a low voice finishes a story. Somewhere the mule sighs, forgiven. The watchword rests behind the teeth of drowsy sentries, and the water clock drips the third watch away, unhurried, one silver bead of time at a time. Everything heavy has been set down. That's the gift of this life you wouldn't survive, the one it saves for last. No one on earth sets a burden down more completely than the one who carried it 20 miles. The furka leans by the tent, empty. The armor is a dark shape on the ground, harmless as a shed shell. Your shoulders, which held up a house all day, hold nothing now. Feel them, your real ones, letting go into the mattress mile by mile, strap by strap. The pack is off. The pack is off. Whatever you hauled through this week, set it with the rest of the baggage. The sentries have it covered, and nothing on the road tonight is yours to watch. The fires settle into their embers. The eagle sleeps in its shrine among the standards and the savings, all the legion's treasures, under one small roof, guarded and sure. Beyond the rampart lies the enormous, patient dark, the same dark that held Britain and Syria and every camp between, and it keeps its distance, as it always did, from a ditch well dug and a watch well kept. 20 miles tomorrow. But tomorrow is on the far side of the water clock, whole watches away, and no trumpet in the world can reach you here. So let the column of the day march on without you. Let the miles uncount themselves, 1,000 paces backward into quiet. The tent is warm with sleeping men. The porridge did its faithful work. The road lies down at last, and so do you, heavier and heavier, safer and safer, one slow breath per pace, at the easy step now, the homeward step, down the long, straight road into sleep. Thank you for marching with me tonight, for the trumpet at dawn, the 60 pounds, the porridge, the watchword, and every counted mile between the recruiting line and the veteran's porch. If this helped you drift somewhere around the third watch, the whole library of nights like this one is waiting, and subscribing makes sure you always find your way back to camp. And if you're still just barely awake, leave that comment with the oldest story your family carries, or simply tell me where in the world you're falling asleep tonight. I'll read it in the morning gratefully over something better than Pascha. The fires are embers now. The sentries have the wall. The road can wait. Rest easy. Sleep well. This is drowsy history.